They told us who held the power, who controlled the skies, who could never be touched. But in a single night, that illusion was shattered. Iran launched a strike that didn't just break through Israel's defenses. It broke through the carefully crafted narrative of invincibility. This isn't just a story about missiles or retaliation. It's about truth, rising from beneath years of silence and political control. A defense minister, cornered by reality, was forced to admit what the people feared most. They were never as protected as they were told, and that confession lit a fire across the nation. Public trust collapsed, anger erupted, and the world, it hesitated, it watched, but it didn't move. This speech isn't just a breakdown of events, it's a deep dive into the moment everything changed. So don't look away, don't skip a second, because once you hear what happened and why it matters, you won't forget it. This isn't just a message. It's the moment the mask came off. Stay with me till the end, because the truth is just getting started. This wasn't just about missiles flying through the sky. It was about a message being carved into the global stage. Iran didn't just launch an attack. They launched a statement. Loud, unapologetic, calculated. And for the first time in a long time, the balance of fear shifted. This wasn't random retaliation. It was timing, precision, and power wrapped into one bold move that said, we're not hiding anymore. Every missile that soared wasn't just metal. It was a symbol that Iran is no longer afraid to challenge what the world has been conditioned to believe, that one side holds all the strength and the other just survives. Not this time. This was more than military. It was psychological. A punch to the image of invincibility, a crack in the myth that only one side controls the board. Iran flipped the narrative. They didn't whisper, they roared. And the world listened. You could feel it in the silence that followed. Leaders scrambling for statements, media trying to spin the chaos. But the damage wasn't just physical, it was moral. This attack wasn't about casualties. It was about calculation. Iran showed the world it could strike hard, fast, and without blinking. That kind of courage, whether you support them or not, demands attention. Because it's no longer about what they might do, it's about what they just did. In full view of satellites, drones, and headlines. And this wasn't just for Israel, it was a warning for every power that thought Iran would fold. It was a demonstration. You may have sanctions, but we have resolve. You may control airwaves, but we control our skies. And above all, you may think we're isolated, but we're not afraid. The symbolism was sharp. It told every watching nation, we're done asking for respect. We're taking it. No round tables, no backdoor diplomacy, just straight, open defiance. And when a nation sends that kind of signal, it doesn't echo quietly. It shakes alliances. It disturbs long-standing assumptions. It forces people to reevaluate who's really in control. Iran didn't just break past radar. They broke past the story the world's been telling for decades. For years, Israel's defense system was more than just a shield. It was a symbol. The Iron Dome stood like a legend, sold to the world as an impenetrable wall, a technological miracle that could intercept threats before they even touched the sky. It gave people a sense of comfort, a sense of superiority. It was marketed as flawless, as untouchable. But on that night, when Iran's missiles came raining down, something happened that no one expected. Some of them got through. And in that moment, the myth began to crack. You could hear it in the silence after the first impact. You could see it in the hesitation of officials. The truth was no longer something they could bury behind press conferences or PR headlines. The Iron Dome wasn't perfect. The defense system had gaps. It wasn't just a military vulnerability. It was a psychological, because when you've told your people for years that they're protected from everything, and suddenly they're watching fire light up the sky from their windows, trust begins to die. The defense minister couldn't stay quiet anymore. The pressure was too high, the footage too clear. And when he finally stepped up to speak, the tone was different. It wasn't confidence. It was damage control. Carefully chosen words, subtle shifts in responsibility, and an undeniable truth buried beneath the surface. They weren't ready for this. They underestimated the scale, the strategy, the precision, and now the world had seen it. This wasn't just a military embarrassment. It was a blow to Israel's global image. Allies took notes, enemies took courage. The idea that Israel could respond with overwhelming control was now under question. And once a symbol falls, rebuilding it isn't just about hardware. It's about belief. The people started asking the questions leadership tried to avoid. How did this happen? Why weren't we told the truth? How could this system, built on billions, still fail in the moment that mattered most? The illusion of control shattered. And behind that illusion was something even more dangerous: arrogance. The kind that believes technology alone can outmatch determination. But Iran didn't just bring missiles. They brought humility. And now, Israel's greatest strength had just become its biggest question mark. When the defense minister finally stood before the cameras, the room was already tense. Not because people didn't know what had happened, but because they knew he could no longer pretend. For years, speeches like his were filled with pride, confidence, declarations of security, promises of control. But this time, his tone was different. His eyes were heavy, his words slow. And when he finally admitted the truth, that the system failed, that the enemy struck deeper than expected, it was like a match thrown into dry grass. The public didn't just listen, they erupted. That single admission shattered something far more powerful than glass or steel. It shattered trust, because it wasn't just about a defense system. It was about belief. The belief that they were protected, the belief that their government was prepared, the belief that they were safe. In one televised confession, that belief was stripped away, and what replaced it wasn't sadness, it was fury. Protests didn't take days to form. They exploded overnight. Streets filled with voices demanding answers, accountability, justice. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was personal. Parents thinking of their children sleeping under sirens. Families counting the seconds between explosions. And now the man who once guaranteed their safety was telling them in carefully chosen words, "We didn't expect this." People don't take betrayal lightly, especially when it comes cloaked in promises of protection. And when the minister admitted they were caught off guard, when he admitted that the system they trusted had blind spots, he wasn't just revealing a military weakness, he was exposing a leadership failure. That's what set the people off. Not just that the attack happened, but that they were left in the dark until the damage was done. Social media exploded. Commentators, generals, former officials, they all weighed in. Some tried to defend, others didn't hold back. But one thing was clear across every screen, every headline, every voice on the street: the mask had slipped. The system had cracks, and the people weren't going to let it slide. The defense minister's admission wasn't just a moment, it was a trigger. One confession and decades of silence, arrogance, and manufactured confidence went up in flames. The anger on the streets wasn't just about missiles, it was about lies. The people weren't outraged because Iran attacked. They were outraged because they were told it never could happen like this. For years, they were fed a narrative of invincibility, a myth of unshakable control, that their country was always 10 steps ahead, always protected, always prepared. But now, the smoke was in their cities, the fear was in their homes, and the illusion was dead. What burned most wasn't the buildings, it was the betrayal. When you raise a generation to believe that behind a wall of strength, and that wall breaks, they don't just panic. They question everything. They question the leaders they cheered, the generals they trusted, the promises they clung to during every siren test, every press conference, every election speech. They weren't prepared for failure because they were never told it was possible. And now, after seeing the cracks with their own eyes, the trust that held the nation together was fractured beyond repair. This wasn't just political frustration. It was psychological rebellion. The people realized they were never told the whole story, that while they were waving flags and believing in the myth of dominance, the other side was watching, waiting, planning. The truth wasn't that Iran suddenly became powerful. The truth was that the people had been shielded from reality for too long. This is what happens when narrative replaces truth. When confidence is sold as certainty. The public didn't lose faith in the army, they lost faith in the storytellers. The ones who said, we have everything under control. The ones who smiled on screen while warnings were ignored, while preparation took a backseat to propaganda. And now, as smoke still hangs over neighborhoods and children flinch at sudden sounds, the public is left wondering, what else aren't we being told? The explosion wasn't just on the battlefield, it was in the minds of the citizens. That mental break, that shift from belief to betrayal is more dangerous than any missile. Because once the people stop believing, once they stop feeling protected, they don't just protest, they rise up. And what started as military failure became national outrage, not because the people are weak, but because they realized the truth came too late. This wasn't just another clash between rivals. It was a shift in the regional power dynamic, clear, undeniable, and broadcast for the entire world to see. For decades, Israel was seen as the untouchable force in the Middle East. Military dominance, intelligence superiority, unmatched global backing. It all created the image of a state that could not be challenged without swift, crushing retaliation. But after Iran's calculated and direct strike, that image is no longer unbreakable. The moment those missiles hit and the world watched Israel scramble for answers, something changed. A new player had forced its way into the front of the table, not with diplomacy, but with precision and power. Iran didn't just respond. They reshaped perception. They showed they weren't just capable of retaliating, but of doing it with scale, with speed, and with a kind of strategic clarity that had been underestimated for years. They didn't launch randomly. They sent a message. We can reach you, we can shake your streets, and we're not playing defense anymore. That moment wasn't just felt in Tel Aviv. It was felt in Riyadh, in Ankara, in Washington, in Moscow. Everyone took notice because it wasn't the Iran of yesterday. This was a nation with resolve, timing, and absolute clarity about how to flex its strength. What made this shift more dramatic was how quickly it revealed the vulnerability of Israel's position, not militarily alone, but diplomatically. Reactions from allies were delayed, carefully worded, almost hesitant. The support that once came within hours now came with conditions. That hesitation signaled something deeper than politics. It signaled that even Israel's closest friends are recalculating. They're watching this new regional equation and wondering how far Iran is willing to go and how prepared Israel actually is to respond without falling apart from within. This attack was more than a hit. It was a demonstration, and in demonstrations, perception is everything. Iran didn't need to destroy Israel's defenses to win. They just needed to show they could reach them. And they did. They just needed to force the truth out of Israel's own leadership, and they did. Now the region watches differently, not with fear, but with curiosity. Who really holds the balance now? The answer used to be obvious, but after this, it's a question that shakes the foundations of old alliances and unsettles the future of power in the Middle East. The most deafening response to the attack wasn't the sound of more missiles, it was the silence of the world. A silence that echoed louder than any explosion. Where once global powers would rush to hold emergency meetings, issue firm condemnations, and pledge full support, this time there was hesitation. Statements were delayed. Language was cautious. Eyes were on the situation, but hands remained still. That silence wasn't accidental. It was intentional. A reflection of shifting interests, of growing uncertainty, of quiet calculation happening behind closed doors. And in that quiet, a new truth started to surface. Israel might be standing, but it's standing more alone than ever before. Iran's attack didn't just test Israel, it tested the world's alliances. And what became clear is that those alliances are no longer absolute. The old guarantees, the automatic defenses, the unwavering moral backing, none of it showed up the way it used to. Some nations chose neutrality. Others chose to stay out altogether. That absence wasn't missed by the people watching from the ground. They felt it, and they understood exactly what it meant. Support is no longer guaranteed. Sympathy is no longer assumed. The world is tired of one narrative, and many are beginning to question it openly. For decades, global powers controlled the story. They chose what outrage to amplify, what conflict to silence, who to protect and who to punish. But now, in a more connected, more awake world, that control is slipping. People see the contradictions. They watch the double standards play out in real time. And when Iran responded, when Israel faltered, and when the world hesitated, millions noticed. That pause, that reluctance to react spoke volumes. It said, this isn't the same game anymore. And in that gap of silence, something else began to rise. Truth. Not from governments, but from people, from voices online, from journalists who refused to read the same script, from civilians who recorded every moment in real time. The truth became louder than the official narrative, and that's what Israel fears most. Not just the physical attack, but the erosion of the shield that always protected it, the unwavering global stage. Because once that curtain falls and the world sees what's behind it, there's no going back. And now that the silence has spoken, people are finally listening, not to what governments say, but to what the facts reveal. So now the dust has settled, but the echoes still remain. Not just from the missiles, but from the questions, the confessions, the silence. Iran didn't just strike a military target. They struck a narrative that had stood unchallenged for decades. And when the smoke cleared, what was left behind wasn't just damage, it was truth. A truth too loud to ignore, too clear to cover up. Israel's defense was breached. The myth was cracked, and the people, angry, betrayed, and awake, are no longer willing to live under illusions. The world watched, and the world hesitated, but the people didn't. They rose, they spoke, they questioned, and now power doesn't look like it used to. Strength doesn't belong to who yells the loudest or who fires first. It belongs to those who hold their ground when the mask of invincibility shatters. This wasn't just history, it was a turning point, a reminder that no system is perfect, no narrative is eternal, and no truth can stay buried forever. Because when the silence breaks and the lies fall apart, all that's left standing is what's real. And right now, the world is waking up to it. Thank you for taking the time to witness what others may try to ignore. If this message sparked thought, stirred emotion, or made you question what you've been told, then it did its job. Stay awake, stay informed, and never stop seeking the truth behind the noise. Good luck on your journey to understanding, because in times like these, awareness isn't just power, it's survival.